Myself and Mr. O'Farrell do have a couple of stipulations. The first one is with respect to Brittany Ziem's testimony. As court recalls, we replayed her testimony from the second trial. And in that testimony, there was a reference to People's Exhibits 106 and 6. People's Exhibit 106 is a 911 recording. And in this trial, it's actually People's Exhibit 2. And then with respect to 6, that's a photograph of a charger. And in this case, in this trial, it's Exhibit 14. So we would just like to put that on the record and just advise the jury. And we can do it later on. I just wanted to let the court know about that stipulation. And we have a similar stipulation with respect to the testimony of Ms. Graham that we're going to play. And that would be a photograph of a laser sight, which was 15 in the last trial. That's 22 today. And her lab report, which was 119 in the last trial and 47 today. And so I would prefer to put the stipulation as far as Graham or the notification to the jury just before her testimony plays.
Mr. O'Farrell?
I have no problem with that, Judge.
How do you gentlemen intend to do that?
Could I just state for the record that People's Exhibit, what's going to be referred to as People's Exhibit 15 and Ms. Graham's testimony is marked People's Exhibit 22 in this trial. Is that appropriate?
And would you be doing that as relates to Ms. Ziem also?
Correct.
Mr. O'Farrell?
We've stipulated here on the record, I would prefer that the court just instruct the jury that that change has been made in the numbers to avoid confusion.
I don't have any issue how it's done, Your Honor. I just wanted to make sure that they are aware that there was a record that there's a change in numbers.
I was trying to avoid getting involved in that, as you understand, because I felt, one of you could just stand up and tell them that. I don't. And so in this particular trial we're having now, the 9/11 audio is Exhibit 2. It was previously marked as Exhibit what?
106. 106.
And then as it related to Ms. Graham, in the previous trial, it was what number?
What's now?
So there's a
22.
laser sight. Ms. Graham's testimony, the laser sight was 15 in the last trial.
It's 22 now, Judge.
Okay, and then her report is 47 now. What was it before?
119.
Oh, sorry. If you want to do them all at once, Judge, there is one more from Ziem, which is
And that's the charger, the photograph of the charger. That was 6 in the last trial.
it's 14 now.
That's why I wanted you to do this. See, this is too much work for me. Okay, you two know what you're talking about. That's why I said you do it. And so what's this last photo? 14?
Yes.
And what was it before?
It was 6.
Uh-huh. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 changes, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Bring the jury in. Now that the lawyers are satisfied that I know what they want me to say.
You asked us to agree, Your Honor.
Yeah, you agree that I should do more work. Good afternoon, you may be seated. Mr. O'Farrell, you may begin your cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Sergeant.
Good afternoon.
It's the Saginaw City Police that requested your assistance in connection with this investigation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And they provided you with the 3 phone numbers that you provided your extensive testimony about. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did they advise you of a phone number 4430029?
I don't recall that number.
Now, the phone number 4754365 was one of the phone numbers that you researched. Is that correct?
One of the phone numbers I analyzed, yes.
And you were advised that that was associated with a Brandon Pennywell and a Davion Thompson.
Correct.
That was the information you obtained from detectives.
I don't remember the exact wording, but yes.
Now, you had mentioned that with Mr. Pennywell, you found something that further gave information about Brandon Pennywell being associated to that phone number. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that involved TLO.
Correct.
And could you explain to me again what TLO is and how that assisted you?
TLO is one of the sources we use, law enforcement, but there's also open sources. You can do a Google search for a phone number. So oftentimes when, again, I go through my analysts and look at the records, certification, subscriber information, then I also see if I can find any other related people to that number that are also then related to this case. In other words, do my own research, what I can find independent of what might be told to me by an investigator. So TLO is just a source that we use. It's a paid source for law enforcement. I believe it's owned by one of the credit bureaus. I don't know if Experian, Equifax, which one it is, but they're a data gathering agency or group. And so they gather data, whether it's your credit score or things about you. And so when you do searches, there's all those different sites that come up and, hey, you pay us a fee, we'll tell you who it belongs to. So.
And Brandon Pennywell's name came up in connection with that particular phone number. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you received information that Mr. Pennywell had passed away.
Correct.
And there was data continuing his association with the number even after his death, which you explained to the jury. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if I use the word data. They have a time frame or a date range, and they had showed the date range into 2019 as they being associated with him.
Okay. Now, for purposes of your testimony, I would suggest there's been testimony that Mr. Pennywell's phone was given to Davion Thompson some months before Mr. Pennywell passed. And I believe the testimony was between 2 and 4 months, but I may be wrong on that. You were provided with the date of Mr. Pennywell's death in November of 17. Is that correct?
I don't remember the date. I do believe it was November 17 is when I was told.
Okay. Now, you mentioned it was not unusual to not have TLO associate a phone number to a person within the short time frame from November of 17 till January of 18. Is that correct?
Correct, in a short time period, correct.
Would another 2 to 4 months make a difference to that?
I can't say for sure in every case. Again, it depends on how you use your phone, who you give your phone to, where you provide your number. Again, if it's to a business or entity that then sells it or provides it to those data collection agency. In some instances, phones can pop up after just a few months. Sometimes it's after a year use. It's different for everybody, depending on your usage and how you use it.
Okay. In this particular number, you examined records for the 2-month period, is that correct?
Approximately. It started again December 1st, 2017. And again, the last date was February 8th. So just over 2 months was the time period of records obtained via the search warrant.
Okay. And over that time period, was there heavy usage of this phone?
Yes.
And was that usage appear to be like at all different times of the day?
I don't remember the specific 24-hour pattern. It seems like, again, going off memory, because it's not something I broke down specifically looking at to focus on. It was used pretty extensively throughout the day.
And we've used the term that this phone was associated with a user of Davion Thompson. Can you have more than one user of a phone?
You could.
The great majority of the phone messages, when you track them by tower, were associated with that address on Washington. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I'd use any words of phone messages. The tower most utilized by this cell phone during the time period of the records that we have by far utilize the closest cell site in that sector that would has an address pointing towards that Washington address.
Now, they aren't common anymore, I guess, very much, but a landline is a phone that's associated and assigned to an address and hooked up at that address by AT&T. Is that right?
It could be AT&T, but now you're starting to get into all kinds of things for landlines, because there's also, you can get it through your cable company, but typically it is associated with an address, yes.
Okay. Now, is it unusual for people to use a cell phone at their home?
I would say no.
People can come and go and they can maybe have 2 phones. They take one with them and leave one at home.
I don't know about that part. When you ask me the question about people using a cell phone at home, I use my cell phone at home. I don't have a landline. So it's the only phone I have.
Okay.
And I know many of the other cases that I do and phones that I analyze, that's the only singular phone that people have. That's their lifeline. That's their only phone.
Okay. So if more than one person is living at an address, they might have a phone where they don't have a landline and they would use one particular phone, more than one person.
I guess they could.
They would have access to it, correct?
I have 4 family members in my house. We have 4 different phones and I don't use any of their phones. I use mine, they use theirs. I can't answer for everybody else.
Well, that's fortunate, but there are people that don't have that many phones, correct?
I don't know, because there's so many phones out there and I do a lot of cases where people have multiple phones. I can't answer who does or doesn't have phones at a specific house.
Okay. And certainly the phone messages, though, are going around the clock.
There's a lot of usage. I can't say specifically if there's a time period where, I don't recall, I should say, that there's a time period where there's a long duration of no communications. But remember, the records also include incoming communications, which does not indicate that someone's making outgoing or using a phone. I can be sleeping and get a text message, an email, or push notification, and those come automatically. I don't control that. Again, I don't control the incoming. I only control the outgoing. The same with the user of any phone.
And if you exclude the incoming, as you have for other purposes in your testimony, these calls were still going around the clock, weren't they?
Depending on the date you're talking about, if we're talking about January 26th, as we spoke about earlier, the first outgoing call wasn't until 10 in the morning. So if you look from that, that means from midnight to 10, that's a 10-hour period with no outgoing communications. So there's other periods, again, I don't remember specific dates, but I know on that date specifically, there's at least a 10-hour period where there was no outgoing communications.
And you were provided no information from the city police as to other users of that particular phone number, 475-4365, is that correct?
Correct.
You got nothing from TLO that would tell you anything one way or the other.
Nothing, no other names that are like related to that address or other names related to the case.
So the only thing you have is the information from the detectives.
That is part of the information I have. Then I do the other thing as far as analyzing the records, life patterns, TLO, and other searches myself.
Well, TLO didn't help you.
It showed a name associated with this phone at one time,
Well, that was Mr. Pennywell.
but he was associated with it.
I understand.
Okay.
Now, on the 27th, the phone moved during the midday period from the location in the vicinity of Washington. Is that correct?
The cell site connections indicated the phone was originally connected to the cell site sector closest to the Washington address. And then the indications from the cell site connections, connection to towers, indicate that the phone did move. And that was just after noon, then in that 25-minute period of time that we spoke about, and then went further west over to the cell site closest Camelot apartment before then going back kind of east into the north before that 2 p.m. time period.
And that movement going from tower to tower to tower was different than the prior experience, almost, well, like 7 times as many at the single closest tower to the vicinity of Washington?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Can you, I guess.
Well, the movement that you found of the phone on the 27th, isn't that different from when all the phone calls were being made from the vicinity of Washington to that closest tower?
I guess I'm still not sure. The closest tower in the cell site that was used the most just indicates and shows that over the duration of the almost 2 months worth of records, that cell site was utilized the most. There was numerous movements on other days of that cell phone. But what we're talking about is, again, showing life patterns and where the phone's used at the most, and is it linked to a person or an address or an area, but specifically focused on the date of the 27th because that was the date of the incident.
Now, certainly between the comparison to the records of Mr. Parham and the movement as shown by the towers, this telephone at the time traveled to the area of 522 South Bond. The phone went to where Mr. Parham was shot. Is that correct?
The cell site connections for the cell sites or the towers that the phone utilized that we're referring to here, that would be the phone associated with Mr. Thompson, the 4365 Sprint number. The cell sites that are used specifically for that 25-minute time period would be the cell sites I would expect a phone in that area to have similar or same.
So whoever had the phone at that time was moving in the direction of where the homicide occurred.
If you take that time period that I referred to from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., so that 3-hour period, an hour and a half before, and the time period after the incident, all indications are the phone started off at or near the area of the Washington address, and then it did move north and west up towards and have cell site connections in the area of the homicide at the time of the homicide.
Okay. Now, when you analyzed Lisa Curtis's phone, it indicated from the tower analysis, if that's the right word, that the phone was right there in the area of King Communications during this relevant time. Is that correct?
Yes, for the time period that we again looked at near the time of the homicide, for the amount of connections she had specifically on LTE, she had one voice call. I would expect someone who is at or near King Communication to have similar cell site connections during that time period.
So that would be inconsistent. Let me rephrase this. That meant that the phone didn't go to the homicide site.
There are no cell site connections to the Sprint cell site that's closest to the homicide or to the Sprint cell site that is the second closest, at least not to the sector that has an azimuth pointing toward it. There were connections to that Sprint cell site that is second closest to the homicide scene. However, it was to sector 1 and sector 2, one facing north and east, the other one facing south and east.
So the user of that phone either didn't go to the homicide site, or if they did, they left their phone back at the King Communications. Is that correct?
Your Honor, can Mr. O'Farrell clarify that phone?
The cell phone of Lisa Curtis.
Cell phone of Lisa Curtis had a voice call at 12:19. And again, that was in the sector and the cell sites that would be what I would expect to see someone at King Communication. All the LTE records also indicate, but again, I would expect someone to be at King Communication, have similar cell site connection. There were no indications that that cell phone that is associated with Lisa Curtis was at or near the area of the homicide during that time period.
Well, if I decided I wanted to go to the bar and have a few drinks, and I thought Judge Jackson would be against that, could I leave my phone here and go and have a few drinks and then come back and say I was here all the time?
You could say anything you want, I guess, but again, we're looking at records and we're looking at communications on the record. We're looking for activity. Is there incoming or outgoing? I don't remember specifically. I could look here and see if it was an incoming or outgoing call on Lisa's phone, which was at 12:19. And then there's the LTE records. What I can tell you is the phone associated with her connected to the cell sites I would expect it to connect if she was at or near King Communication.
Okay. Now, the phone associated with Mr. Pennywell or Mr. Thompson certainly traveled to the homicide location, but you don't know who was carrying the phone at that time, do you?
In my opinion, the same person used the phone through the duration of the records. Again, started on December 1st, 2017, and went through the time period when it was canceled, which was January 27th, for the same person operating that phone.
And if it was more than one person that was operating the phone, if it was users rather than users, it would have been consistent with being one of the users.
If it was, if your hypothetical was correct and we had multiple people using the phone, then we wouldn't see the same top numbers. You would see a different use pattern. There was a variety. It appears to me one person's using it, but again, can I say 100%? I can't. But that's what it appears to me. The same person using the phone the entire duration of the records.
Okay, but you can't say for sure.
I cannot.
Okay. And you mentioned duration of the calls being a factor that can limit the strength of your opinions. If you're looking at a 2-month period, but say at the end of that duration, there was a change of user, it would be hard to pick up from because of the short duration. Did I get that right?
No, I don't remember using the word duration. What I talked about was the call volume or usage volume. Again, looking over these records, and I just have noted here that there was over 11,500 communication entries. So, I mean, just thinking about that in less than a 60-day period, more than 100 a day, and actually getting closer actually to 200 a day. That's a lot of entries, a lot of communication, a lot of usage for that device. Again, these are smartphones. People use them like computers and use them. There are lifelines. That's how we do Facebook and Messenger and emails and internet and all kinds of other things. So there was an awful lot of usage. What I had stated was if someone over a 2-month period only used their phone and only had 1 or 2 communications a day, maybe one text one day, a phone call the next, and no or little internet, it'd be much harder to have an opinion of the usage over 60 days. But with 60 days of usage with this many communications, I was able to formulate my opinion that it was the same user using the phone.
Well, there's a lot of communications, but if you limit to 60 days to say 1 or 2 days, doesn't that affect the strength of your opinion in the same way as if there were less calls?
Well, in a specific 1 or 2 days, like when we broke down January 26th or January 27th, I have the previous 7 weeks of records to compare it to. And when I got 7 weeks of records to compare a specific day, my opinion again is the same person who's using the phone during that time period.
Okay. Now, we've had the TLO that confirmed or supported that Brendan Pennywell had this phone. But it was actually subscribed to John Doe, is that correct?
John Doe was listed as the subscriber from Sprint.
And would that have been when the account was open?
That would have been when the account was initially opened. There was no, if someone had made a change to the subscriber information, which does happen and does happen on Sprint records, there will be a date, and usually it's when someone changes their address and updates their address, and then sometimes, you know, names change or something on there. But there was no indication from when it was originally effective or put into effect back in 2016. No subscriber information has changed since then.
And a person would have had to have subscriber information to cancel the phone?
You have to have account information. You don't specifically, again, every carrier is different. And we're talking now back several years, how Sprint system was then compared to now that they're part of T-Mobile. But you have to have account information to be able to satisfy the customer service person that you're speaking with, that you are the account holder, you possess that phone, and that, you know, you have authorization to either deactivate, change a phone, get rid of a phone, or cancel it, or whatever you did, whether it's a password, a PIN number, and in addition to account information. I can't just call up and say, make up a number and say, I want to cancel, and Sprint says, okay. You have to have information.
Okay. So a password or a PIN number would have been given at the point that the account was open?
Can't say specifically, because especially back then, when you would get a phone through Sprint, you would get your text messages, especially if it's a pay-as-you-go of when your bill's due, or you need to buy a new prepaid card, and you can set up an account through their texting. It's actually used to be through Boost Mobile, which was part of Sprint. And so you could do it right from your phone. So I can't say specific if a password was set up initially or later on. When I said it looked like there was a device change, you know, at some point prior to this incident, I can't say when that was.
So there's no way at all to determine who canceled the phone.
Correct.
So much of the analysis that you use involves numbers, thousands of communications, including data communications, percentages. But when we get to the point of trying to figure out who had the phone, it's your opinion, is that correct?
After looking at the 2 months worth of records, all the entries that we have, not only just the calling or communication with specific numbers for the outgoing, but also looking at the location of the phone, that is my opinion.
And so there aren't facts or data that tells us that, but it's an opinion that you've drawn, and that's the best opinion you can come up with. Is that correct?
Well, you got to understand, besides the phone records, besides the TLO, besides the subscriber information, which comes back to a Saginaw area, then there's the other information that the lead investigator gives me, the known address on Washington, the homicide address, the known or possible suspect, and then information that the known person or person that TLO shows the phone was to, then who they gave the phone to. So those are all, again, pieces of the puzzle. They keep adding up to the bigger picture is what they do. So it's not one thing. It's not one entry. It's not 100 entries, not 1,000 entries. It's all the entries with the information provided by the investigating agency, in addition to the usage and call pattern, location pattern that I formulate my opinion.
Okay. So certainly the information from the Saginaw City Police has been substantial input as far as your opinion?
any case that I do, I have to have information. I can't just, someone give me a set of record and say, go figure it out. I have to have information. My job is to analyze it, formulate opinion. And as I testified earlier, there are often times when I will direct an agency that this person is not involved, had nothing to do with it, go look somewhere else. When you add all the pieces of this puzzle together from the investigating agency with the information I was provided and the information I had and the information I located myself, that's how I was able to formulate my opinion.
Often you're called upon to exclude individuals based on their phone records. Is that correct?
Phone records can exclude people, yes.
Which assists the investigation.
It can.
And going back again, the phone number 4430029 means nothing to you from this investigation.
Not off the top of my head.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else, Mr. Fedora?
Yes, Your Honor. So Detective Khan, counsel was asking you about around the clock use of the phone. You recall that?
I do.
Okay. You indicated that you looked at the records for January 26th with respect to the phone associated with the defendant.
Correct. That was a specific date that I focused on breaking out the entire day and looking at outgoing communications. Again, I looked at all the communications and all the records, but to memorize or look at every specific date or write something about December 1st, 2nd, 3rd, all the way through the 27th would be impossible. I don't have that much time. I have too many cases. But this January 26th and 27th, I specifically broke down outgoing communications and looked at the entire 24-hour period for both those dates.
Okay. And do you recall what well, let me clarify. You said the first call within a 10-hour period was a 10 a.m. call on January 26th.
I believe it was 10:07. I can actually look here if we need to, just to be more specific, but I believe it was at 10:07 is what I think it was. So on January 26, 2018, there were 73 outgoing communications. And again, I start at midnight for the 26th and I go all the way until 11:59. The first communication listed up here is at 10:07 and 19 seconds a.m. So that would be just above the arrow there on the screen, 10:07.
And then prior to that, so 10:07 a.m., you have a call on January 26th.
That is the first outgoing communication. Again, I focused on outgoing, what the operator or user of the phone controls.
And then prior to that, what's the last call on January 26th? Are there any other calls on January 26th?
There is 73 outgoing communications on January 26th, and the last one ended at 23:58 or 11:58 p.m. So in other words, starting at 10 a.m., we had 73 outgoing communications.
I apologize, Detective. I misled you on my question.
Okay.
What was the first call on January 26th?
Okay, the first call was the one at 10:07 a.m.
Okay, so there are no other calls before that.
None.
All right. So we heard testimony earlier from the defendant's ER doctor. I apologize, Your Honor, for can bear with me. It wasn't something I anticipated. All right, so roughly speaking, the defendant was admitted into the ER sometime around 11 p.m. on January 25th. The defendant was then discharged somewhere around 2 a.m. January 26th. Now, let me ask you this: do you know of any calls or the last call on January 25th that was made from the phone associated with the defendant?
I don't recall specifically looking at the late hours of the 25th.
Okay. But during this time that the defendant was in the hospital, at least on January 26th, there were no calls made from the phone associated with the defendant.
There were no outgoing communications from midnight till 10 a.m. So a 10-hour period. First
Okay.
10 hours of the date, January 26, 2018.
And that's consistent with the defendant being treated at the hospital at that time. He wouldn't be making calls. Is that reasonable?
Well, objection, Judge. That's a hypothetical that assumes facts in this case that have nothing to do with the expertise of this. He's testified there were no calls over a 10-hour period of time. These other conclusions about cause and effect.
I can withdraw the question, Your Honor. That's fine.
All right.
So just to clarify, counsel was asking about the phone associated with Lisa Curtis. We can safely say Lisa Curtis's phone, since she testified that was her phone number. Counsel asked you about possibility of Lisa Curtis leaving the phone behind. And so can you just explain again why, in your opinion, that's not consistent with the phone records?
The phone records, again, looking both at the LTE communications, the number of communications that I had highlighted in yellow, and then also the voice call connection that was during that time period. Again, I think our brokers down, same thing from 11 a.m. till 1 until 2 p.m. again on January 27, 2018. They would be, the cell site connections were consistent with someone being at or near the King communication, which was the information I was provided.
Was there information she was making calls during that period, 11 to 2?
I think there's information, there was calls, but again, with the incident time being at 12:30, I really focused on the time period from noon to 1. That's the most important time because of seeing where the phone was located. In other words, was a phone in the area or making connections to the cell site by the crime scene? So during that time period, the one I really focused on, which was noon to 1, the indications was from the records that the phone, I believe, would have been at or near King Communications with the type of cell site connections that it had.
And then just getting to this hypothetical that there could have been 2 users of the cell phone. Now, if you want someone to know how to get a hold of you, you're going to want them to have only your number, correct?
Years ago, when I started doing phone analytics and we didn't have a smartphone, we had flip phones, a little different than what we have now with smartphones, because again, I use the word lifeline. We do so much on our phone, so much personal interacting with our friends, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Messenger. It's very rarely now when I analyze phones in all our investigations that these very expensive, these smartphones that we loan to somebody else because they have all of our personal stuff. They have my Facebook, they have my Messenger, they have all these other social media apps and stuff. They're gonna get my emails and all their stuff. So it is much less often that I would ever see. In fact, I don't know any recent cases where someone is loaning a phone to somebody else or multiple people are using a cell phone, like say 10, 12, 15 years ago.
And let me rephrase my question. So you don't want someone to try and get a hold of me and someone else is going to answer my phone. Is that an assumption you can make?
Right, you want the phone number to be for you, not for other people. If you want someone to get a hold of you.
All right. And then what you're also saying is that, well, let me ask it this way. There's a lot of data being used on the phone associated with the defendant, correct?
Yes,
So if you're someone who likes to use the internet a lot, you're not going to want to share your phone with someone else. You're going to want to be able to just use that whenever you want. Is that a safe assumption?
in my opinion, yes.
Now, you indicated that with respect to determining who had the phone, or sorry, who canceled the phone, would it be a safe assumption that the person who had the phone last, likely the person who had canceled it?
It's definitely someone who has access to the account, knows information about the account to be able to cancel it. Again, I can't say specifically who canceled it. I can just say it's someone who has to have access to the information for that account to be able to provide the information for it to get canceled.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Mr. O'Farrell?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down. Do you need some water? Sure. Pardon?
Okay, all right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break if you want, my clerk, please.
All right.
You could be seated. While the jury is out, I just want to make sure that everything is all set on the video. So why don't we test that and see?